Put the link to the slides up there so you don't have to take photos or anything. They're also in my presenter profile on the schedule. I'm going to talk about OpenStreetMap and with this mapping, I have to coordinate two clickers. Hopefully I don't lose it. I'm going to go over OpenStreetMap. How many people have heard of it? How many people have heard of OpenStreetMap before? Okay, cool. So I'm going to go through how you can access data from there, how data is created, and pedestrian use cases. Well, just a quick overview. OpenStreetMap is a user-contributed map of the world. It covers the whole world. Anyone can edit OpenStreetMap. It's been around for many years. Around 15, I think. This is where we are. This is the default style when you go to the website. It's not the most beautiful style, but it's good for editing and kind of seeing what data is there. But a lot of people only ever see this, which is unfortunate because there's so much rich data under there. My first and favorite tool is the query features button on the website. So you can hit that question mark, click on something, and just get data on that feature. So that's the building we're in. The law center is not mapped yet, which I heard that's last night. But if it was, it would show up kind of in those key values if it was labeled on the whole building. So just a quick view of the edit tool. When you hit that edit button on the top left, this is just one of the editors, but kind of get an idea of how many other attributes and features you can add to things. Some people like to think of OpenStreetMap as a database that just has a graphical representation because there is so much in there.
Could you speak up here?
Sorry, not great at projecting, but I'll try. So another great tool when you need more than just querying one feature at a time is Overpass Turbo. So this is a website where you can just write kind of quick queries. So for this one, I looked for 2 court squared, which is this building again. This is a really simple query. I am not great with this tool, but it's good to know about. And there's a little wizard button that you can use to fill out key value queries. It's kind of a quirky query language with this tool. It's not SQL. It was something that was made for OpenStreetMap data specifically. So just here's another tool using two keys. It's one of the things I like to tell people, like, why don't I always just default to Google Maps? Well, something I like to search for is like basketball courts that are lit, that have lights. You can type that into Google Maps and sometimes it'll show things. It'll, search through reviews. But there isn't a great way to kind of update that data, like go to the basketball court, see if it's lit, go back and update. But that is something you can do with OpenStreetMap. So here's the example, and it's always in progress. Some of these more obscure queries don't have data everywhere. Kind of depends on, was there a city data set for that thing and was that imported? Then sure, they'll have coverage through the whole city. But if there wasn't, it just gets built up over time. And this is the way I like to use OpenStreetMap beta. Just diving right in. So here's an import into a SQL database. I'm going to break this down. But this is all the features that are around this spot. So you can see there's Grand Central, don't know how to say that, Lucky Pizzeria, the Korean church, City Go Fuel, some city bike stations. This is extremely brief set of instructions for how to get there. I didn't really want to give this talk as a workshop because there's a lot of setup involved. We would spend like the first half half of the time setting up. So the idea is just to throw a lot of things at you, and you can go home and play with it. If you're familiar with Docker, that's kind of the easiest way to get this going. OpenStreetMap, you can download the whole planet. It's like 100 gigabytes. You need more RAM than a standard laptop to load it in. But there are extracts for states or regions. So New York is a big state, but you can process that into a database in like 15 minutes and update that every day or so if you need that frequency of update. Test with a smaller state. Delaware is great. It's like 20 megabytes and loads in like 30 seconds. But it doesn't have the same characteristics as New York. So going back to that query and breaking it down a little bit, features in OpenStreetMap have key value tags on them. So this query just starts with selecting those keys that we care about, the name, amenity, which is like a catch-all for different points of interest, and then tags, which are kind of the grab bag of tags. So anything you don't declare in your import schema will get thrown into this extra column. And there's so many keys and tags. People can add whatever they want. There isn't a strict schema, so kind of need to shove that all in somewhere. There's three main geographies. There's points, lines, and then polygons in this data. And default import is to store them as three separate tables. So just starting with points here, this is the top half of the query. And then, where I want the names to show and amenity not to be null, so that when I show you this table, it's not just blank in those columns. And then there's all these other functions up at the bottom that are kind of unreadable when they're written like that. But these are from PostGIS, which is an extension for Postgres that gives you geospatial operations. So starting from the top, there's SD within, which shows you what one feature is within another. So we're looking at the points, and then they're within. Yes.
What dictates the PSG projection?
Yeah. So projections are this grab bag of labeling data, and most of the data is stored in WebMercator, which is a projection most commonly used to show maps on the internet. So if you need more precise analysis, like you want to know, you want to measure things, then you should project into a local projection. If you don't, if you're just doing something quick for a presentation, then leaving it in WebMercator is doing it.
The actual determining whether or not that point is within that buffer, how do you know which projection you're defaulting to in this query?
The data is, when I imported it, it was stored as WebMercator, which is 3857. You could probably set it to transform the data on importing. So for that buffer, I'm using that buffer command. I clicked a point on the map and got it as those two coordinates. You can use various tools to do that. And then 1,000 is 1,000 meters, so one kilometer around where we are. Any other questions on this work?
After using PostgIS, it's how.
Yeah, it could also be known as SRID, UPSG codes. There's a lot of nuance, but here's just another example of something I've been thinking about recently, like buildings near Long Island Railroad stations. So there's pending talks about whether the state should mandate more transit-oriented development. Well, how do you talk about that without knowing how many buildings are actually around stations? You can go through every town on Long Island and look at their zoning code or various data sets, I guess Nassau County, Suffolk. But OpenStreetMap is more or less normalized. So this is just a rough count of buildings by stations. Obviously some stations like Metzville's Point is surrounded by parking lots, 'cause that's by Met Stadium. But you know, this is like the first place I go to when I have the geographic question. Another one is like, what are the most amount of parking by stations? So I was maybe too surprised to know that was the Lefferts Boulevard air train station, is 330,000 square meters, which is huge. It's like 100,000 more square meters for the next largest station. And looking at data and tables is not the most fun. So let's look at kind of those. So these circles are that number of area, is how big the circles are. Circles are not the greatest way to represent data, because your mind can't really compare two circles of somewhat equivalent size, but for a quick visualization, it's not the worst.
I applaud this. Yep. 26.
So these are another thing. So crosswalks are labeled mostly through the city. I'll talk a little bit later about that coverage, but these are points where there's an unmarked crosswalk by a highway on or off ramp, which is something that's incredibly dangerous, but way too common here. There are 56 of these points. Some of them are the same crosswalk, but this is the only way I know how to get this information. If you're not a SQL fan, there's another tool called Osmium. I don't know if that's how you actually pronounce it, but that tool will scan through the OpenStreetMap extracts, so you can use it as a command line tool, or there's Python bindings. Then it'll let you process one feature at a time as it goes through these files. So this is the same query from earlier, but written as a Python script. This takes about 2-3 minutes to scan through New York. If you're just writing a one-off thing, this is useful. You don't have to worry about loading up the database, but you don't have indexing, and if you want to change your query, now you have to re-scan through the whole state. And if you're doing the whole planet, it can take like an hour to go through, so your hour turnaround is not fun. If you're familiar with QGIS, which is a desktop JS program, there's this plugin called QuickOSM, which brings you Overpass queries straight into QGIS. So you can write your query and you can pan around the map and pick where you want it to run. And then when you run it, that data will go straight into a format that you can work with in QGIS. And if you really do need the whole planet, but you don't want to spend a ton of time setting up that infrastructure, you don't have a powerful computer, you just pay Amazon to do it for you. So there's the daylight distribution, which is a cleaned up version of OpenStreetMap put out by Meta, which they use in their products. By clean up, I mean they remove swear words and they remove some like self-intersecting geometries of things like that. And you can load that into Athena, which is a query tool, very quickly. And I don't really have any examples of that because I haven't done it yet, but I just wanted to tell you guys about it. Because there's so many ways to access this data. Just depends on what you're doing. You could scan the whole planet for hospitals and ice cream shops in 25 seconds, and it'll probably cost you like 5 or 10 cents because you pay per query with Athena. Some just quick tips on sharing information. Make maps. Don't be afraid to share them. There's a very simple project I put together on showing benches. So this is Court Square Park, which I didn't know was under construction until I took the train here. So this is probably out of date. Or maybe it wasn't. I am not familiar with this area coming off the train. But there's just a little guide of like how to go from database to map in that repo. So
question. Where does the bench data come from?
it comes from that OpenStreetMap database. So I download all the data, I put it in the database, and then I write another script to copy it out.
Like in a scenario where a park is under construction and benches get removed, like what is the lag time? Like, are we aware of that? Like, when does that become visible?
It's whenever somebody deletes those benches from when the park was under construction. So the lag time could be years, it could be a week. It just depends on whether there's motivated mappers in that area. So BetaNYC is doing some great work to get the word out of OpenStreetMap and getting people mapping, but it's entirely volunteer.
Maybe, I'm not sure if this is the right session for questions like this, but is there kind of a, I guess, does each feature have kind of like last updated or some sort of click? Is there some measure of data body to see if the data you have that query?
Yeah. So each feature does have, when it was created, it has the change version. You can kind of do change over time, but it's a little complex because you have to process these OSM change files like in order. So that's not super easy. And there aren't really people that take snapshots of what it used to look like maybe a year ago. So you're kind of almost on your own to keep checking the same spot, which is a little annoying.
Are there other data quality metrics, like how many people sort of vouched for this version of the data or anything like that?
You can see how many people edited within an area, but there isn't really a way to say like, I map this bench and then someone else comes by and says like, yes, that bench is there. There's a check date tag, which gets used for people to say that it's still there. Like you mapped this bench 10 years ago and I don't have anything to add to it, but I just want to confirm that it's still there. That's becoming more popular.
Yeah.
So this presentation came out of another one, but kind of my motivation for mapping, which you saw at the beginning of this, was from this book about kind of the built environment and kind of how we conceptualize our city. So I do so through thinking about where benches are, where sidewalks are, and things like that. But kind of the thing to get out of OpenStreetMap is it is what you make out of it. It is what you want to map. And hopefully what you're interested in is in there. And if it's not, you can help at it. So I'm going to go through kind of a scenario, a spot that I was interested in and how I built up that data using OpenStreetMap. It's down by Red Hook under kind of where the BQE turns into the Prospect Expressway. Map tip, if you need to make these gray borders, make a big gray polygon, take the feature that you need, run the difference operation, which will cut a hole in that, then just zoom in, then it'll look pretty like that. Took me a while. So I started with just looking at this area and kind of what was missing across various maps when I moved down there. And something right away is that giant highway that really cuts through the neighborhood. Happens all over the city and something we're still living with. But it's also reflected in almost all of the representations of the map we have. So if that was Google, this is OpenStreetMap. This is a different OpenStreetMap style that's focused on bicycle routes. I was just having a really tough time figuring out where I could cross the street in that area just by looking at the map. And it does get better when you type in directions for routing. Another map, all the same. A mobile app still can't figure out like, where you can cross the street. The crossings here are spread out, so when you miss one, to walk like 4 or 5 intersections until there's another one. So I thought maybe I'd pull out the data. Wait, there was no data, asterisk. There is a city data set for sidewalks. I am not sure if there's a crossings one now. At the time, I did not know about them. I know about this. So, we can make the data. We can do this. So here's just a ground view of that spot. See the crosswalks, they're under bridge, so you can't see the satellite imagery. You have to go there physically. I walked around with this notebook. I drew out all the intersections. This is not the most efficient way to map, but it's a good way to get started when you're not really sure what you're looking for. And you're likely going to forget something, so take lots of photos. Think about what's important to yourself. Familiarize yourself with the model a little bit. There's like a property that is important, but you're not sure about it. Would have wished you knew before. So now that I took all those lines, went to that editor that I showed in like the second slide, traced those lines, labeled which ones were sidewalks, which ones were crosswalks, and which ones had pedestrian signals, what types of crossings they were. Now I could finally cross in this area. And something I forgot to mention earlier is pretty much every app that's not Google Maps uses OpenStreetMap data to power their applications. So this City Bike app, Strava, anything you can think of. So when you contribute this data, it may take them a week or a month, depending on whether they prioritize that area for their update process. But it'll bubble up and it'll make those apps better. So there was one thing I realized after this was I didn't map the curbs at first, and I can cross curbs, but not everyone can cross curbs. Curbs can be really tough if you're in any sort of accessible position where you just can't go up them. And this area is, even though there's a surface road under it, it's basically a highway. Like if you don't get to the other side before the lights change, it's not a fun time. So you don't want to be in that scenario where you're at the other end, there's a curve you can't mount, and you have to start walking into the road while cars are honking at you. So then we map those curbs. And those are the little green dots are in the end of the lines. So talk a little bit about mapping those queries. I use QGIS a lot. It is way too much to talk about in one talk, but I will talk about just getting the queries in there. Once you connect a database to QGIS, you can open this database manager, when you can run your queries in here and then load them straight onto your map through this panel. Just a little bit of time. Okay, sorry. So thought about, where are the sidewalks, figure out the tag, it's highway equals spillway, write that query, select all the columns. Select is the last part of a query that never runs. There's no reason not to just take everything at once, figure it out later. From the table with the lines, with the tag, and then just hit that load button, and the database manager will load this new layer. So another question, where can you bike in this area? There's various dotted lines that all mean something else on this map that are a huge pain. Um, if you look at the city bike guide, which the city publishes once a year, they give out to bike stores. They're free. You can see even these lines kind of collide. And right in between the F and G stops is that little purple thing. That's where I like to say the bike lane gives up. It just ends because it turns into a right turn lane. I gave this presentation many months ago. Since then, someone was killed by a truck in this area, which is awful. And hopefully there's work to get this area changed, but it hasn't changed yet. And it's really upsetting. But making better maps that kind of highlight where infrastructure fails, I think will help with advocacy. That's what that spot looks like. I didn't do this, but on one of those poles, someone spray painted "The truth ain't on Google Maps." I thought was appropriate for every presentation I ever give from now on. Here's some coverage of the whole city's sidewalks. There's 2 ways to tag sidewalks. You can do it on a road itself. Say this road has sidewalks on both sides, the right or left, or you could draw them separately. Those 2 methods were in contention for a while. This was kind of the older way of doing it on the roads itself. This query is back from July. I haven't reread it since then, but you can kind of see coverages down in South Brooklyn and not very much the rest of the city. Sidewalks off of roads, map does their own lines, are way more spread out. This was maybe a month ago I ran this query. A lot of trails within housing complexes are mapped by Amazon. Amazon uses OpenStreetMap for their delivery vehicles, which helps them more in like rural areas where you just don't know where driveways might be when they're on the side of a highway. But they've also mapped some sidewalks in the city. Some editing by year, so the darker red are more recently touched sidewalks. You can see that Brooklyn kind of came out recently. I can't see super well. Hope you guys can. And you can kind of get an idea of which areas are maintained by seeing when they were last touched. We can look at curb distribution. So curbs are pretty well mapped in Brooklyn, but they're not in Manhattan. A lot of the curbing schema comes from the Open Sidewalks group, which is out of the University of Washington. They build applications for analyzing that data. AccessMap.io does routing based on accessibility, which is great. The city has to build curb ramps everywhere due to an ADA lawsuit settlement, so they have their own tracking program for keeping track.
When you say curbs, do you mean curb cuts for wheelchairs and so?
Yes, yeah.
Do you know if on OpenStreetMap curbs that regulations are mapped, like where there's parking and where there's delivery zones and things like that?
No, that's not mapped very well. But it could be. It's just taking a lot of coordination. But that information is definitely interesting to various cities. I know someone did that all for Philadelphia. They kind of have that gold standard. Talk about an area that the community filled out 2 years ago in Flushing, where we used the task manager. So this is a way to kind of divide up an area with a common goal, write instructions, get people mapping. It's commonly seen in like humanitarian case. Humanitarian OpenStreetMap uses this a ton to mobilize volunteers and their employees, but it can be used for anything. So 15 people and three validators, which are people that check the task after it's been mapped, went through and did this area with, I think it's a community board boundary, but I'm not entirely sure. And that's what it looks like after. And you can do a lot more when the data is complete. You can be more sure of your analysis. You can look at what's there, what's missing. How do you know what's missing if you haven't mapped everything else? You might be unsure if it's just missing because it wasn't mapped yet. So one pattern I saw, just looking at this roughly, was those like red clusters of where there aren't crosswalks. In Flushing, it seemed common where there would be like 3 crosswalks, but 1 missing. I'm not entirely sure for that traffic pattern. But I don't often take the next step to overlay like crash analytics or things like that. But you can. Yeah, like here. So in the center, there's those 2 red lines. You can't really cross there. You should go like all the way up to where there's 2 horizontal green lines. But then you can't cross like north-south up there. So it's confusing. But it's also important to go to the areas you're studying and actually see if they're a problem. Sometimes you just overthink it and then you go there and there's not much traffic at all and it's not a huge problem. But I haven't been to this block. And then you can do routing. So I didn't put together any routing examples yet. But some great projects to look into. OSMNX can be used to analyze routes. Python. Valhalla has many parts. It's like a full-fledged router that can build isochrones with or use different modes of routing. If you really love Postgres, you can use the PG routing extension to build a routing graph on that. All great tools. Not a lot of them have great support for pedestrian features, so you may have to configure them. And what I mean by that is, so you route, kind of assign like your values to what different types of roads are and whether or not you should prioritize them. You might have to come up with that yourself based on looking at the area and seeing, New York residential road means this, but in a different state, residential road means this other thing. You could do things like the truck route is mapped as like high HGV equals yes. I don't know what HGV stands for now, but you could say like ignore those roads because that spot on 9th Street that I showed earlier is part of the truck route and the bike route. And a lot of apps will tell you to bike over it, but you could take maybe a more calm route if you went a minute further north. This I showed, yes.
For what it's worth, off OSMNX, you can specify the network type as walk, but it's a little bit kind of opaque as to exactly what they're using and other criteria for determining that. But I think you can like dig into, all of the different specified kind of the ways if you really want to go through all the text.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant. They all have walking profiles, but they're like rudimentary, I guess. So yeah, definitely start with what they have and adjust it based on your tests in the field, I guess. Yeah, this is one of those spots where there's slip lanes and crosswalks. And you can find these spots by just knowing about them or being them being in your neighborhood. Or you can kind of build these kind of queries based on having one example, figuring out how it's tagged, and then scaling that example around. And then the second half of this book I referenced earlier talks about not just, knowing the city you're in, but going that next step and thinking about how you would change that city. Yeah, there's the streets plan. There's probably other talks about this. There's, various city council initiatives. Think about your area, make maps, email them to your council member, get other people to sign on. That's what I use this for. This is one spot. I think this is, I forget what train line this is in, but these crosswalks go straight into fences, which is really unfortunate. But you can map that. You can map a sidewalk that just ends at a fence, and then later on, someone could be like, "Where do sidewalks just end in fences?" I guess I deleted the other slide, but after that, I reported this to 311. I know they probably won't fix it, but you can track whether things have been fixed using OpenStreetMap. So keeping tabs on when was this map, when was it last fixed. City data sets might not update as often as SEM does. Sad bus stops. So this bus stop has 2 crosswalks, but neither of them end on the curb cut. They just end in the bushes, and then you need to just walk in the street and get up there. I think this road is fairly wide, so people probably won't get to you, but this should be accessible and better. This has a shelter. Not all bus stations have shelters. That's in the city data set. Whether or not it has a shelter, but things like whether or not it's split. So if there's any street lights, whether there's trash cans, just endless amounts of fields you can add. I guess these slides got out of order, but this was that pedestrian ramp that I complained about, and it gets closed like the same time you submit it. So, but this was a faded line. They only paint lines in the summer because the paint has to be hot enough for the thermoplastic paint to stick to the road. Sometimes they just close those requests when it's out of season. I'm not 100% sure on the DOT process, but another thing I tell people when I talk about this outside New York is how many cases we have where bike paths turn into staircases, which if you just don't know about or miss the signs can be awful. Technically, they'd say like you're not supposed to bike there, but people do. Some of them. I don't know, it's been a while since this was opened. It feels like it's been here forever, but when the Brooklyn Bridge bike lane opened, it was mapped like right when it happened, because somebody went to the ribbon cutting and updated the open time like right after they did it. Yeah, so things open quickly. The OpenStreetMap community is getting bigger. An example of when I mapped the other side, the inbound side, back then, I think it's changed a little since now, but you don't have to be a skilled mapping person to do this. So this diagram on the right was just what I drew in Photoshop, and I asked other people, does this make sense? And they didn't laugh. They were just like, sure, I understand what you're saying. Don't worry about it. There are so many projects going on. And the city uses lots of contractors, and I know they have trouble keeping up with what stages of work things are in and whether or not they're done. And that's something I think is a great use case. This bike lane on 20th Street in Brooklyn, north of Greenwood Cemetery, took almost a whole summer, went through various stages, was unprotected, then protected. I'm sure all of that happened in between versions of the New York data sets. And OpenStreetMap standards are more or less universal across geographies. They may change based on local mapping patterns, but it isn't what the city says is protected. It's what people who go on the ground and survey it say they are. Not that the city lies or is anything like that. It's just different standards of various features And I don't know, it's just interesting to see where authoritative opinions differ from reality. And then there's just rough cases that kind of break the schema. So this is down in Dumbo where there's ever-ending construction. And this is kind of a curb ramp. I mean, the asphalt does go all the way to the curb, but it's, you know, definitely not to code or standards. But, you know, what do you put in the map until it is ever fixed? I haven't really figured that out yet. These things that the city puts everywhere because it's more possible than pouring concrete. There's not great tagging for that, curb extensions. But the tagging is evolving, and I definitely think people have asked, like, where are these things painted? Are they effective? Do they have bollards or not? Those are all good things to know. How many parking spots were removed by them? Are they still used as parking spots? All things we can capture.
What's the process for like new tags? Is there like a monthly review of PRs and the schema? Like, how does that happen? Yeah.
So they're first just used in the wild. You can add a tag, yeah. And as it gets more traction and becomes something that's like noticed as missing, you can write a proposal for why you think this should be a accepted tag by the community, in like Wikipedia format, in the OpenStreetMap wiki, and then people can vote on it. And if there's not a good enough current equivalent and you are passionate enough about making it happen, it is very likely your tag will go through. Concrete islands, bus bulbs. There isn't standard tagging for this. There's 3 different ways to tag it. But some of them have been mapped, 8+ years ago, so they're not a new thing. They're just not a feature that has been focused on. Just closing off, what's missing in the network? What do we need more tagging for? It'd be great to see some applications built off this data now that it's getting to like wide enough coverage in areas of Brooklyn and Manhattan. So once you get people using apps, people commit feedback, or maybe they'll edit the map themselves. There are people that think everyone will edit someday. I do not believe everyone ever will edit this app. But getting that feedback together and then building that community where we can help each other. Because this is what I'm really interested in, but other people aren't. And there's no, I would help someone else map whatever they were into just because it's a community. Just shout outs like the local people whose names, some of their names I know, some of them it's, street names. Everyone at BetaNYC, C, Noel, Kazi, they all are mapped now. If you want to join us, where there's an OpenStreetMap Slack, this is my cat who enjoys the queries because they make the laptop hot. Anyone that walks anywhere. This is just a list of most of the tools I used. I forgot the Python tools here, but those are in the earlier slides. There's going to be a local OpenStreetMap conference down in Richmond. A bunch of us are going to take the train. Proposals are still open if you have any talk ideas. Come join us. Thanks.
I'm a little interested, something you touch on, but traffic signs and signals, how easy that is to kind of incorporate. It seems a little bit cumbersome a couple of times that I've tried to start looking at it. And then as a secondary thing, which I'm sure is even more difficult to kind of specify is like the green wave initiatives for like signal timings for making it more conducive for cyclists. I'm sure that's not even like a thing to try to figure out, right?
Yeah, so starting with the first question, yeah,
The reason why I thought about it is you have that slide that's at the end of 34th Avenue where you cross the highway to get to where City Field is. And I've experienced one time there biking over there, and there's a traffic signal, but then a little tiny traffic stop sign where the off-ramp is. And it's like not, I was like riding behind someone who like, we have the right of way. It was like, oh no, there's like cars just streaming off of the highway over there. But yeah,
well, signals are mapped for intersection on these little dots, and then stop signs you can't actually see on the map. There's no visualization for them, but they are mapped also on the lines. I know it's there.
and that's as a point or like a node, or is it a feature of the?
It's a point on the line. So, I can't hit the edit button and sign in now. That'll take too long. But they're not mapped as their features in real life. They're mapped as kind of their relationship to the road network. For green wave things, signal timings are not really in there. Not that I'm familiar with, but collections of roads that make up bigger networks are mapped as these features I didn't touch on, called relations. So if you have like the Shore Park Greenway, this is many roads, but they're all connected in this one feature. So sometimes you'd have something like that. It was a greenway, or a different reason.
So for one of those ways, would it just, you would see as some feature that it had an associated name that was the Shore Parkway Greenway? Is that how that works?
Each one of these small segments would be part of this bigger relation. And then there's gyro relations like the East Coast Greenway, just like that bike trail, and the Empire State Trail that goes up to Canada.
Do you have any examples of like policy advocacy that has used like OSF to like maybe advocate for better bike lanes or for cuts or something?
Yeah, not really in the US. Various cities in Europe use OpenStreetMap as their like official city map. So that helps there. Not really bike lane related, but there's a hiking trails working group that has, it's organized by OpenStreetMap, and it has like all trails and all the other apps and like the USGS and the National Park Service, and they all kind of work together to make sure that trail map data is accurate and the same so that people don't wander off trails. I don't know if that quite gets at it, but I think US governments are more aware of OpenStreetMap now. At least they've heard of it. So that helps.
I guess I'll have that same question for like the relationship between a lot of open data and posted on the cities. Open data for what we think is like are like street lines or either bike lanes. Is there a relationship that most agencies are putting that data within OpenStreetMap as well? I don't listen to it. What maintain those data sets? Was it kind of up to the community to try to pass edits from one to provide, I guess, check edits from one to the other?
Yeah. So there's a problem with the OpenStreetMap license is it's not public domain. It's a share alike license. And I think at least the city or the federal government is kind of required to publish their data as public domain. So they would have to contribute twice almost. A lot of departments are they want that authoritative aspect of this is our data set, we can vouch for it. So they have not yet adopted OpenStreetMap as like, this is the only thing we're going to use, which makes it tough because then it's asking them to do more work. So not New York City, but there was an account called New York City Parks that edited a bunch of parks, and I had with like surprising detail. So I don't know if that was the Parks Department. Similarly, like a DOT type account edited. Sorry, I forget it exactly. The roads around LaGuardia the same day the terminal opened, in areas where you wouldn't know what those roads were unless you had prior access. And then an account named New Jersey Department of Transit left all these notes about new turn restrictions. So those rules are in there where like you can't turn right on this road. So they didn't know how to add that, but they were aware of like reporting it because they like the departments of transits, they want to stop like people from using navigation apps from making the wrong turns on certain roads, but they may not have contacts at like Google or Lyft or whatever, depending on what size government agency you are. And the other questions?
Yeah, just for what it's worth. So, I mean, NYC DOT does publish like the whole Lion data set, which is like a riff off of that DOT's Tiger data set. But for at least for pedestrian and to some extent for cycling as well, there's a couple of gaps in that data set where it's parks property. So like specifically, I think like Riverside Park along the Hudson River Greenway, like there's just little holes in the actual data, and OpenStreetMap actually does a quite a better job, especially in terms of like pedestrian access.
Yeah, there's, the borders don't dictate where the data starts and ends. You can go to the New York City Long Island border and the map keeps going. There's no reason to stop your analysis based on city borders. The city bike rack data set is not super accurate either. Neither is the OpenStreetMap one because it started from the city one. Yeah. Any other questions? Yep.
You said that you showed a little photo of your notebook, making note of the crosswalks, and you said that's not the most efficient way for people to update this. So how do like professional, like OpenStreetMappers, go in person and do these kind of site visits and then update? Are they also like taking notes of how? Is there? You mentioned briefly like a mobile OSM app.
Yeah. There's a couple different apps, and this is a good segue to the next talk. Street Complete is an Android-only app, unfortunately, but it asks those Google Maps style questions of like yes, no. Like, is this place accessible? Yes, no, and then it'll update the map. So that's a great way to get started because you don't need to know all the rules and intricacies of tags. There's GoMap on iOS is a app that people use that's like a full-fledged editor. Oh man, I think it is this one, even though it has, maybe not. Sorry, I don't have a link to that. And then there is then the next activity will cover field papers, but if you don't make it there, and this is a way of just generating pieces of paper that you can then go out and with a clipboard and write on them, and then you can scan those afterwards, and they'll be georeferenced to where you where they were made, so you can overlay those with OpenStreetMap and trace what you wrote. And that's great for getting people involved that don't want to do the data entry afterwards, but you want to get a group activity going. Oh, well, thanks for coming.
Thank you.